The morning sun barely pierced through the heavy clouds hanging over Manhattan as Officer James Martinez adjusted his collar, preparing for another day on patrol. After 15 years on the force, he'd developed a sixth sense for trouble, and something about this morning felt different. Standing at his usual post near Trump Tower, he noticed a black SUV making an unusually sharp turn, nearly clipping a yellow taxi. The driver's aggressive maneuvers caught his attention immediately. Years of experience had taught him that even the smallest traffic violation could lead to something bigger. "Control, I've got eyes on a black Cadillac Escalade, possible erratic driving," he spoke into his radio, his trained eyes following the vehicle's path. The SUV's windows were tinted well beyond legal limits, making it impossible to see who was behind the wheel. The next few moments played out like a scene from his academy training days. The SUV swerved between lanes without signaling, forcing other cars to brake suddenly. Martinez flicked on his lights and radioed for backup, standard procedure for any stop near the high-security area around Trump Tower. As he approached the vehicle, Martinez noticed something odd about the driver's body language through the partially lowered window. The man seemed too comfortable, too entitled. It wasn't the usual nervousness he encountered during traffic stops. "License and registration, please," Martinez requested, maintaining his professional demeanor. The driver, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, handed over his documents with a smirk that made Martinez's instincts buzz with warning. "Do you know who I work for?" the driver asked, his tone carrying that familiar hint of superiority Martinez had encountered countless times in this wealthy district. But Martinez hadn't spent 15 years on the force to be intimidated by status or connections. Running the license through the system revealed a story that made Martinez's jaw clench. The driver, Trump's personal chauffeur for 8 years, had a history that should have disqualified him from the position months ago, multiple violations in 3 states, and a suspended license in Nevada that hadn't been reported. Martinez's radio crackled with his partner's voice asking if everything was okay. He knew what would happen next. The calls would start coming in, the pressure would build. But as he stood there, thinking about all the times he'd seen accidents caused by reckless driving, all the families he had to notify because someone thought they were above the law, he knew what he had to do. He began writing the citation, his pen moving steadily across the paper despite the growing tension in the air. The driver was already on his phone, no doubt calling someone who could handle this situation. Martinez could hear raised voices from inside Trump Tower, could see security personnel moving with purpose. This wasn't just about a traffic violation anymore. This was about doing what's right, about protecting people who trust law enforcement to keep them safe. As Martinez finished writing the ticket, he thought about his own family, about the oath he took to serve and protect, regardless of who sat in the vehicle or which powerful figures might get involved. The morning sun finally broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across Fifth Avenue as Martinez handed the citation to the driver. He knew this moment would change things, could feel it in his bones. But as he watched the SUV pull away, hazard lights still blinking, he stood a little straighter, secure in the knowledge that he'd done his job exactly as he should have. Little did he know, this routine traffic stop was about to spark a chain of events that would test his integrity, challenge the system, and reveal just how complicated the relationship between power and justice could become in modern America. Back at the precinct, Officer Martinez sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen. The background check on Trump's driver had opened a Pandora's box of concerns. 8 years of driving one of the most prominent figures in New York, yet nobody had bothered to run a proper check. The suspended license from Nevada was just the beginning. Digging deeper, Martinez discovered a pattern that made his stomach turn. The driver had accumulated 17 moving violations across 3 states in the past decade. Most were settled quietly, with fines paid through a maze of corporate entities. "You might want to see this," Martinez called over to his supervisor, Lieutenant Chen. The older officer leaned over his shoulder, squinting at the screen. "Look at these dates. He was driving Mr. Trump while his Nevada license was suspended." Chen's expression darkened as he scrolled through the records. "This is complicated, James. You know how things work around here." His voice carried the weight of experience, of knowing how power dynamics could influence even the most straightforward cases. Martinez remembered the countless times he'd watched wealthy individuals slip through the system's cracks. But this was different. This wasn't about a parking ticket or a minor speed violation. This was about public safety, about the responsibility that came with driving someone as high profile as Donald Trump. His phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. "Officer Martinez speaking," he answered, his voice steady despite the tension building in his chest. "This is Robert from Mr. Trump's office." The voice was smooth, practiced. "We'd like to discuss this morning's misunderstanding. Perhaps over lunch? There's a nice place just around the corner." Martinez felt the eyes of his fellow officers on him. Word had spread fast about the traffic stop. Some looked concerned, others curious. A few seemed to be actively avoiding his gaze. "I appreciate the offer," Martinez replied, "but everything's in my report. If there are questions about the citation, the proper channels are available." He could almost hear the surprise on the other end of the line. The afternoon brought a parade of unexpected visitors to the precinct. First came the lawyers, then the fixers, each carrying folders filled with documents claiming various diplomatic immunities and special privileges. Martinez watched as they huddled with department heads, their voices hushed but urgent. His partner, Officer Thompson, dropped a coffee on his desk. "You're trending on Twitter," she said, showing him her phone. The story had leaked, spinning in different directions depending on who was telling it. Some called him a hero, others claimed he was just seeking attention. As the day wore on, Martinez received another surprising piece of information. An anonymous tip revealed that the driver had been involved in a minor accident 2 months ago, one that never made it into official records. The source suggested there might be security camera footage. Martinez thought about his own family, about his kids who were proud their dad was a police officer. He thought about all the young officers who looked up to him, watching to see how he'd handle this pressure. The right thing wasn't always the easy thing. His father had taught him that. Just before his shift ended, Martinez received an email from the department's Internal Affairs Division requesting a meeting first thing tomorrow morning. The subject line read, "Regarding this morning's traffic stop, urgent review required." As he packed up his things, Martinez caught a glimpse of the evening news playing in the break room. His traffic stop was already the lead story, with pundits debating whether he'd overstepped or simply done his job. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he'd go home knowing he'd upheld his oath to protect and serve, no matter who sat in the back seat. The Internal Affairs meeting started exactly at 7 a.m. Martinez sat across from 3 senior officers, their faces illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. The room felt smaller than usual, the air thick with unspoken tension. "Let's talk about your decision-making process yesterday," the lead investigator began, his tone carefully neutral. "Some people are suggesting you could have handled this differently." He shuffled through papers, avoiding direct eye contact. Martinez took a slow breath before responding. "I'd followed standard procedure. The driver had multiple violations, a suspended license, and was operating recklessly in a high-security zone." His voice remained steady, professional. The investigator leaned forward. "We've received calls from City Hall, the governor's office, even Washington. They're questioning why a routine traffic stop needed to escalate into this." He gestured at the morning's newspapers spread across the table, each featuring variations of the same story. A knock at the door interrupted them. Lieutenant Chen entered, holding a USB drive. "You all need to see this," he said, plugging it into the conference room's computer. Security footage from 2 months ago played on the screen, showing the same black SUV involved in a minor collision. The driver had left the scene without reporting it. The room fell silent as they watched. This was no longer just about a traffic stop. It was about a pattern of behavior that had been ignored because of who signed the checks. Martinez's phone buzzed in his pocket. Another message from Trump's office, this time offering to make things right if he'd consider revising his report. He turned the phone face down on the table, focusing instead on the evidence in front of him. Outside the precinct, reporters had gathered, their cameras ready. Some of his fellow officers warned him to back down, to think about his career. Others quietly supported him, slipping notes of encouragement into his locker. By afternoon, the pressure had intensified. The police union representative pulled him aside, speaking in hushed tones about career preservation and picking your battles. Martinez thought about his 20 years until retirement, about his mortgage, about his kids' college funds. But then he remembered something his grandfather, also a cop, used to say: "The badge isn't just metal, it's a promise to protect everyone equally." That promise felt heavier now than ever. The department's legal team arrived next, armed with statistics about similar cases that had been resolved quietly. They spoke about liability, about public relations, about the delicate balance between law enforcement and powerful figures. Martinez spent his lunch break calling his wife, explaining why their phones wouldn't stop ringing, why reporters were parked outside their house. She understood, she always had. "Do what's right," she said simply. "We'll handle whatever comes next." As the day wore on, more evidence emerged. Other drivers came forward with stories about near misses involving the same SUV. Traffic camera footage confirmed patterns of reckless driving. Each piece of evidence made it clearer why Martinez couldn't simply look the other way. By evening, the internal affairs team had reached a crossroads. The evidence supported Martinez's actions, but the political pressure was immense. They gave him one last chance to modify his statement, to soften the edges of his report. Martinez stood up, straightening his uniform. "The truth doesn't need modification," he said quietly. "And neither does my report." He walked out of the room, past the waiting reporters, past the whispered conversations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new pressures, new attempts to make this story go away. But tonight, as he drove home past Trump Tower, past the spot where it all began, Martinez knew he'd chosen the right path, not the easy one, but the right one. The fourth day brought the confrontation everyone had been expecting. Trump himself walked into the precinct, surrounded by a swarm of lawyers and security personnel. The usual buzz of police work fell silent as he made his way through the building. Martinez was called to the captain's office, where Trump sat behind the desk as if he owned it. The space felt cramped with security personnel lining the walls, their earpieces glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Officer," Trump began, his voice carrying that familiar tone from TV appearances, "you've created quite a problem. But we can fix this." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a transfer offer, a promotion to deputy chief in a quiet suburban precinct, complete with a significant pay raise. Martinez didn't touch the folder. "Sir, this isn't about creating problems or fixing them. It's about public safety." He kept his voice respectful but firm. The security cameras in the corner blinked silently, recording every word. Trump's expression hardened. "You don't seem to understand how things work in this city. I've been very generous, very patient." He turned to the captain. "This officer's clearly got a personal agenda. I want him off the streets." The captain, a 25-year veteran, looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Trump, our officers follow standard procedures. Officer Martinez's record speaks for itself." But his voice lacked conviction, wavering under the pressure of the moment. "I've made my wishes clear," Trump continued, standing up. "Either handle this or I'll find someone who will." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Outside the office, other officers pretended not to watch through the glass walls. Some had their phones out, discreetly recording. This would be all over social media within hours. Martinez thought about the driver, still behind the wheel despite everything that had come to light. He thought about all the other drivers on the road, about his responsibility to protect them. "Your driver is a public safety risk, sir. That's not a personal agenda, that's a fact." Trump's face reddened. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Standing up to the big bad businessman. He walked around the desk, getting closer. "Heroes end up working security at shopping malls. Is that what you want?" The room felt electric with tension. Martinez stayed perfectly still, maintaining eye contact. "What I want, sir, is for everyone to follow the same rules. Even your driver. Even you." "Rules?" Trump laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I make the rules in this town. Always have." He turned to his lawyers. "File whatever needs to be filed. I want this officer's badge." As Trump and his entourage prepared to leave, Martinez spoke one last time. "The dashcam footage from the traffic stop goes public tomorrow, along with the security camera footage of the previous accident. The truth doesn't care about rules or power, sir. It just is." The room froze. Trump's lawyers huddled together, whispering urgently. Even Trump seemed momentarily caught off guard. Martinez watched them leave, their expensive shoes clicking against the precinct floor. His phone was already buzzing with messages from reporters who'd somehow heard about the confrontation. The captain sighed heavily. "You just made some powerful enemies, Martinez." "No, sir," Martinez replied, straightening his badge. "I just did my job." He walked out of the office, past the staring eyes of his colleagues, past the lingering cameras of Trump's security team. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. Traffic flowed, people rushed past, life went on. But something had shifted, something fundamental about power, about justice, about one officer's stand against a system that too often looked the other way. The story exploded across every major news network by sunrise. Footage of Trump's confrontation with Martinez had leaked, turning a local police matter into national news. Cell phone videos captured from outside the captain's office played on endless loops, each network adding their own spin to the story. Martinez's morning coffee was interrupted by a call from a producer at a major news network. "We'd like to have you on air," she said, her voice eager. "Your story's resonating with people. They're calling you the cop who stood up to Trump." He declined politely, just as he declined the dozen other interview requests. This wasn't about becoming famous or making headlines. It was about doing what was right. The precinct's public information officer was drowning in media requests. Reporters camped outside the building, their satellite trucks creating a small village in the parking lot. Every officer entering or leaving faced a barrage of questions. Trump's team launched their counter-offensive by mid-morning. A spokesperson appeared on several networks, painting Martinez as a disgruntled officer with a history of targeting high-profile individuals. They dug into his past, trying to find anything that could discredit him. "Can you believe this?" Officer Thompson asked, showing Martinez her phone. Social media was divided, with hashtags both supporting and attacking him trending nationwide. Some called him a hero, others accused him of seeking attention. The driver's previous violations became public knowledge, sparking debates about privilege and accountability. Former chauffeurs came forward with stories about similar incidents that had been swept under the rug. Martinez's wife called from home. Their children's school had sent them home early due to the media presence. Reporters were camped outside their house, hoping to catch a glimpse of the family. "We'll get through this," she assured him, her voice strong despite the strain. "You taught our kids to stand up for what's right. Now they're seeing their father do exactly that." By afternoon, the story had evolved. Political pundits debated the broader implications. Civil rights activists spoke about systemic inequality in law enforcement. Former police officers shared similar stories of pressure to look the other way. The precinct received hundreds of letters and emails from across the country. Some were from other police officers sharing their own experiences with powerful figures trying to bend the rules. Others came from citizens tired of seeing different rules for different people. Trump's legal team filed formal complaints against Martinez, citing procedural violations and requesting an immediate suspension. They claimed he had violated department policy by discussing an ongoing investigation with the media, though he hadn't said a word to any reporters. The police union found itself in a difficult position. While they had to defend their member, they'd also felt pressure from city officials who relied on Trump's business investments. As evening approached, Martinez sat at his desk, reviewing dashcam footage from other officers who'd encountered Trump's driver. Each video showed similar patterns of reckless behavior, building a case that couldn't be ignored. His phone buzzed with a text from his teenage daughter. "Dad, my friends at school said you're trending on TikTok. They're making videos supporting you. I'm really proud." That message meant more than any news coverage or social media trend. It reminded him why he'd become a police officer in the first place, to show that one person standing up for what's right could make a difference. The day ended with a press conference where the department tried to strike a balance between supporting their officer and maintaining political relationships. But the story had grown beyond their control, becoming a symbol of something larger, a test of whether justice truly applied equally to everyone. 1 week after the traffic stop, Martinez sat in front of the police commissioner and the department's highest-ranking officials. The wood-paneled room felt heavy with tension as they reviewed his case file. "Your record is exemplary," the commissioner began, sliding his glasses off. 15 years of service, Dozens of commendations, not a single complaint upheld. He paused, tapping his fingers on the thick folder before him. Until now. Martinez knew what was coming. The political pressure had become too intense. City Hall had made phone calls. Donors had threatened to pull funding. The mayor himself had expressed concerns about the situation. "We've received direct orders from above." The commissioner continued, his voice carrying a hint of resignation. "They want you off the streets. Effective immediately." The other officials avoided eye contact, shuffling papers and checking phones. But then something unexpected happened. Officer Chen stood up from his seat along the wall. "Commissioner, with respect, I have to speak." All eyes turned to the veteran officer. "I've served this department for 25 years. If we punish officers for doing their job correctly, what message does that send?" The room fell silent. Chen had never spoken out in meetings like this before. His words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Another senior officer cleared her throat. "The dashcam footage confirms everything in Officer Martinez's report. The driver's record speaks for itself. We can't ignore public safety because someone has connections." The commissioner rubbed his temples. "It's not that simple. We're facing budget cuts, political pressure. Mr. Trump's influence in this city runs deep." Martinez finally spoke up. "Sir, when I took my oath, it didn't come with exceptions for the wealthy or powerful. Every citizen deserves the same protection, the same accountability." A junior officer brought in a stack of papers, printouts of social media posts, news articles, and letters from other police departments across the country. Public support for Martinez had grown exponentially. The commissioner studied the papers, his expression shifting. "Moving you to desk duty would look like we're admitting wrongdoing," he mused. "It could damage department morale, public trust." Outside, they could hear protesters, both supporters and critics, their chants echoing through the building's walls. This had become bigger than one traffic stop, bigger than one officer doing his job. "Here's what we're going to do," the commissioner announced after a long pause. "Officer Martinez stays on active duty, but transferred to a different precinct. Not as punishment, but for his safety and to avoid any appearance of targeting specific individuals." The compromise wasn't perfect, but it was better than expected. Martinez would keep his badge, his street duties, his dignity. More importantly, the department would send a message that doing the right thing still mattered. As Martinez left the meeting, fellow officers lined the hallway, some nodding in respect, others offering quiet words of support. The thin blue line had held, choosing integrity over influence. That evening, as he cleaned out his old desk, Martinez found a note from a rookie officer. "Thanks for showing us what the badge really means." Sometimes, he realized, the biggest victories came from the smallest moments of standing your ground. 3 months after the traffic stop that changed everything, Martinez walked into his new precinct in Queens. The morning sun caught his freshly polished badge as he nodded to fellow officers, some now familiar faces, others still learning his name. The story hadn't ended with his transfer. Trump's driver had finally been replaced, forced to step down after more evidence of driving violations emerged. The new chauffeur came with a clean record and proper credentials, a small victory for public safety. Martinez's phone buzzed with a text from his old partner. A police academy in Chicago wanted him to speak to their graduating class about integrity under pressure. It would be his 3rd speaking engagement this month. "You've started something," his new captain said, dropping a newspaper on his desk. The headline read, "Police Departments Nationwide Review VIP Treatment Policies." Similar stories had been popping up across the country as other officers began questioning long-standing professional courtesies extended to the powerful. In the break room, younger officers gathered around as Martinez reviewed case files. They didn't just see him as another transfer. To them, he represented something important. One rookie had told him, "You're the reason I decided to stick with the academy when I wanted to quit." His new neighborhood beat felt different from the glossy streets around Trump Tower. Here, people stopped him on the street, not for autographs or photos, but to share their own stories of standing up to power. An elderly woman brought him homemade cookies, saying he reminded her of her late husband, also a cop who never backed down from doing right. The lawsuit Trump's team had threatened never materialized. Instead, an independent review board had examined the incident, using it as a case study for police training. Their conclusion supported everything Martinez had done, establishing new guidelines for handling high-profile traffic stops. His old precinct had changed too. The captain who'd struggled under pressure had taken early retirement, replaced by someone who'd publicly promised to support officers who enforced the law without fear or favor. Small changes, but meaningful ones. Martinez's family had adjusted to their new normal. His kids no longer needed police escorts to school, and reporters had found other stories to chase. His wife had started a support group for police families dealing with public pressure, turning their experience into something positive. That afternoon, responding to a routine call, Martinez spotted a familiar black SUV rolling through a stop sign. Different driver, different passenger, same sense of entitlement. He flipped on his lights, following procedure just as he had that morning 3 months ago. This time, the driver immediately pulled over, license and registration ready. No phone calls to power brokers, no threats, just a simple traffic stop ending in a simple ticket. Progress, one traffic stop at a time. Back at his desk, Martinez found a letter from a fellow officer in Los Angeles. "Your story reached us out here," it read. "Yesterday, I pulled over a city council member's driver. For the first time in my career, I didn't worry about consequences. I just did my job." As the sun set over Queens, Martinez headed home, his shift complete. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new opportunities to prove that integrity wasn't just a word in the police manual. It was the foundation everything else was built on. The world hadn't changed completely. Power still talked, money still whispered, and some people still thought rules were for others. But in precincts across the country, officers stood a little straighter, remembering that one cop in New York had chosen duty over convenience, right over easy, and truth over power.